From Mark to open up the show, Mark writes, so do you want Jaden to play or not? How about more syrup for the waffling you've been doing the last 2 days? And then from Jake writes, why not? And now why? From Sheehan on starters playing. Really glad both of you noticed. Appreciate that, Mark and Jake. Good morning, everybody. Max, Brian are here. Ben Standig will join us at 12. No news, correct, this morning on whether or not Dan Quinn's made a decision about which starters are going to play and which are not. Am I correct about that?
Correct. Nothing's come across the desk. Dan Quinn has not spoken today.
Does it come right across your desk? It does sometimes.
Sometimes, on occasion. Depends.
Yeah. They're not obviously practicing today. Today would be the travel day to Detroit. They have an early game tomorrow. The game is at 12 noon tomorrow on Channel 9 locally, if you want to watch. I have waffled a little bit this week. I guess that is based on just, I don't know. I feel like I would like to see the quarterback in a new system with a new offensive coordinator, with new pieces around him, play in an actual football game, play actual football before they actually have to play football on September 13th. But Ben asked a question yesterday, which Quinn really didn't answer. He asked the question about essentially what's the benefit versus the risk, the benefit of playing a series or two versus the risk of potentially getting injured. Dan didn't really answer that question, but I think anybody that's thought about this, and I wouldn't recommend thinking about this too much. This is not really a good use of any sort of free time in the last few weeks you might have before you're back into your normal fall routine. But it is kind of the conversation that we all end up having, early, mid-August when these preseason games come around. And to me, what is the benefit of playing a series? That's not a real football game experience. You go out and you play a series. Last year, the series for Jaden was handing the ball off 3 times, dropping back and running for a touchdown from 14 yards out. He didn't even throw a pass. Now, you could say he wasn't, and the team wasn't super ready to open up the season. Week 2 would be certainly an example of that with what happened at Green Bay. They looked awful. They looked unprepared. They looked not ready. The Giant opener, these openers are always hard to judge. They played well enough. They won the game, and they were 1-0. But would a second series with 2 pass attempts, would that actually have made a difference? A real game and real, sort of dress rehearsal isn't playing a series, isn't playing 2 series. It's playing a football game. And so if you're not going to do that for at least a period in which you can get a sweat, where you can adjust, where you can do it the way you would do it in the regular season, I guess I have waffled back to what's the point? I think I was just eager to see the new coordinator and the quarterback have to call plays, communicate plays in sort of an environment that looks and feels more like a real football game. That's all. But I guess after yesterday, I'm feeling like, what's the point? Now, he may end up playing his starters. We had Jordan Dejani from CBSSports.com on the show earlier this week, and he told us about what Robert Saleh is thinking about doing in the last 2 preseason games that the Tennessee Titans have. He's the new head coach in Tennessee, and he apparently is thinking about playing the starters for a half on Sunday against Seattle. By the way, that game is nationally televised on Fox Sunday night against the Seahawks. And then playing the starters for perhaps even more than a half against the Chicago Bears in their final preseason game on Saturday, August 29th. On some level, the more I think about it, you either do it that way or you don't do it at all. You either put your starters out there, you plan a little bit like you would for a regular season game. You're not going to give away the whole playbook, but you game plan enough so that you can have some success and stay on the field. And yeah, it's hard to game plan when you don't know who you're playing. That's part of the preseason challenge. You don't know what the other team's going to do. You don't know what the other team looks like because they haven't played a game. And more likely than not, they're not going to put their starters out there either. But the more I think about it, it's like, this is obviously from a fan's point of view, but either do it the way Robert Saleh and Tennessee are thinking about doing it, play your guys like it's a real game. Have them build those calluses that Dan Quinn talked about. The calluses that come from tackling and being tackled, blocking and being blocked, contact in a contact sport, which you really haven't had at any point in a meaningful way during the summer. And the quarterback has none of it unless he's playing in the preseason games. You either do it that way or you just say, nah, we're just going to do stuff here in practice. We're going to get them ready. We've got these joint practices. We'll get them some real looks, but they're not going to play real football until real football is played and it counts. Thank you for noticing, though, Mark and Jake, on the way I have. Yes, it's true. I have waffled a bit here over I was pretty adamant on Wednesday that this is not the way to go. I mean, from a fan's perspective, it doesn't seem like it's the way to go. And yet, what is the real value of a series or two? I don't know if it doesn't sound like there's tremendous value. And the risk is not that great in a series or two. You minimize the risk as well if you're only playing a series or two because it's a limited opportunity for you to get hurt, to get hit hard, and to get injured. But yeah, there you go. Hello, everybody. What do you want to see tomorrow at this point? Honestly, I don't know that I care to see much other than some of the young players continue to, evaluate well like they did last week, like a Robert Henry Jr. That evaluation had to be a positive evaluation for the team. These preseason games, for the most part, for 95% of the teams, it's really about trying to nail down roster spots 45 through 53 and then figure out who you're going to sign to the practice squad. Really good teams, usually it's about roster spot 50 through 53. Sometimes it's roster spot 53 or 52 through 53. With teams that aren't as good, that are going through transition, it's probably about the last 6, 7, 8 roster spots. That's what training camp's about. That's what these preseason games are about. So if that's the focus for this team, I do think the running back position is an interesting one. I thought Robert Henry Jr. looked like the kind of back that is a really natural fit for more of a zone run scheme and appeared to be even more than the bigger, stronger Kaytron Allen. Kaytron Allen had 23 carries in a preseason game last week. That's insanity. Robert Henry Jr. had 12. I mean, they combined for 35 carries for 160 yards and 2 touchdowns in a preseason game. You think they wanted to run the football last week? Part of that, of course, when you get to the second half is let's run the football, let's keep the clock moving, and let's get the hell out of here because we're playing against their 3s and 4s, and we got our 3s and 4s. Let's just, let's move on here. But the running back position will be an interesting position because Jeremy McNichols is hurt. I do think that Jeremy McNichols is a player that they would like to see on the roster. And I think that because he's an excellent special teams player. And the truth is, when he's had an opportunity to play running back, he's been pretty damn good for them. They have a lot of trust in Jeremy McNichols. So let's say that he ends up being on the roster, but maybe he won't. Maybe he'll start on injured reserve. It comes down to Henry Jr. or Kaytron Allen. I guess you could keep both if McNichols is on injured reserve, but 4 running backs means 1 less tight end or 1 less wide receiver, more likely than not. The tight end position is a very interesting position. Yankoff, Sinnott. I mean, it'll be Bates and Okonkwo. Are you going to keep 4 tight ends, or are you going to pick? They like Yankoff. He's very athletic. He is somebody that can do a lot of different things, including, by the way, probably line up a quarterback and push it for a first down if you need that. Trust me, I'm not revealing anything that they're working on. That's a total guess. Wide receiver is a very interesting position, probably the most interesting position for them. You know that you've got Terry, Diggs, and Antonio Williams. Antonio Williams is going to be on the roster because he was a 3rd-round pick, and they like him. If he's not ready, so be it. Most rookies aren't. But they're looking down the road where even if Antonio Williams is a 2027 plan and beyond, that's okay, because we don't know if Terry McLaurin will be on this team. Not that they're exactly the same position, but you're going to need receivers next year, potentially. But Diggs, McLaurin, and Williams are givens. I think Jalen Lane is a given because he was one of the better punt returners in the NFL last year. I think Luke McCaffrey's had a very good camp by all accounts, but his kickoff return ability, which was really good last year, there are other guys that can do that if you decide to move on from McCaffrey at wide receiver. I think the Burks, Diami, Van Jefferson, how many are you keeping? 8 or 7? It's not going to be 6. It's going to be at least 7. And then you get a guy like Jaden Bradley who catches 2 balls last week and nearly blocks 2 punts. And everybody's liked him since the moment he had that, tryout, which Adam Peters referred to as one of the best tryouts he's ever witnessed. They have a lot of receivers. Are they elite receivers that they're choosing from? No. Most teams don't have elite receivers after number 1. Many don't even have a number 1. But that position group really going to be interesting to see if these, reps, these snaps that they get in these preseason games end up being the difference between, say, a Van Jefferson and a Jaden Bradley, or a Burks and a Van Jefferson, or a McCaffrey and somebody else. There could be some mystery injuries on the way, too. Don't forget that. They always seem to happen right around that, August 25th time frame. Oh, didn't know he was hurt. Yep, going to start the season on injured reserve. The center position is, without question, a concern and an intrigue, because we don't know that Nick Allegretti's going to be as good as the center they had last year. And nothing that's happened in camp or anything else could tell us anything about that, because they're even getting to be a bit concerned about the lack of reps. Quinn mentioned that yesterday. We would have preferred to have had more reps with Allegretti as the starting center. They haven't had those because he's hurt. He's not going to play tomorrow. Will he play in the joint practice against Baltimore? I have no idea. Is it important for Allegretti to play? If it is, wouldn't it be more important for Allegretti to play with Jaden Daniels, the starting quarterback? And what if Allegretti remains less than 100%? Do they have a center that they feel good enough about going into Philadelphia to face the likes of Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis in week 1? Can you imagine? You've got Matt Gulbin, a rookie center, and he's looking across at Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis in his first NFL game with a quarterback that's under center more. I mean, there could be a lot of disruption to the offense there. Defensively, I don't even know where to start defensively. They basically told us last week who the starting safeties are: Cross and Reeves. I think we have a pretty good sense that Sanders-Still and Amik Robertson are going to be out there as corners, and that the third corner will probably be dependent on how quickly Trey Amos gets back to 100%, and they feel good about him. The good news is, if he's not ready, they do have a veteran and Rasul Douglas, who could go out there and play against his former team, one of his former teams anyway, in the Eagles. They have, a front seven where there are a lot of new names, couple of holdovers in Payne and Kinlaw and Luvu. No more Johnny Newton, but what will it look like? And are we going to get any sense of that tomorrow? Chasen's banged up right now. We'll see Sonny Styles, I'm guessing, play a little bit more football tomorrow. Always banged up. I'm assuming we're not going to see him tomorrow. Dorrance Armstrong is on his way back. Is he ready to play? I don't know. Be interesting to see what we see, what they put out there tomorrow for us to see. They like Josephs. There's no doubt about that. It feels like he's going to make the team somehow. They also like John Baptiste. But there's not a lot of room for additional edge pass rushers at this point. 2-point stance outside linebackers. Owe, Chason, Armstrong, Josephs, John Baptiste. Am I forgetting anybody in terms of their, 2-point stance outside linebackers? Might be in a 3-point stance at times if they're in a base 4-3. We'll see. Up front, when will Tim Settle be ready? Will he be ready? Is he the nose tackle, or do they like somebody else at this point? Do they like Tuttle? Do they like Barber? He's not a nose. Can Payne play nose if Settle's banged up and not ready or hasn't gotten enough reps? I think we're going to see Kinlaw, Settle, and Payne in the base 3-4, with Settle playing that zero technique nose tackle, with Owe and Chason and Luvu, and I would guess Styles, but it might be Chanel more than Styles. It might be that they're rotating in that spot, or the three of them are, Luvu, Styles, and Chanel. The defense, to me, when you think about what they added, all of the new players, Settle, Owe, Styles through the draft, Chason, Cross, Robertson, Omenahue, who I think actually is going to be a player that is a big part of what they're doing. Joseph's through the draft, Chanel, Rasul Douglas, Fabian Moreau. I mean, they've added a lot of new players, and all of them seemingly are going to play, if not start, defensively. I was on last night with Nick Ashew, who was hosting on 106.7 The Fan, the night show, and, he just assumed, and I kind of assumed the same, that the defense is going to be better. But he also threw out the possibility that the defense may have to lead the way early in the season. I'll tell you one thing. I feel better about the defense because, A, it can't be as bad as it was last year. B, it just looks completely different. New players, younger, faster, better, a new coordinator. But there's a lot that could go wrong. Obviously, the most obvious thing is they could just start losing a lot of these players like they did last year on offense and defense. But beyond that, maybe the pieces don't fit well. Maybe these players were just, better than average, not good enough. Maybe the coaching isn't ready yet. Maybe he's, as a first-time coordinator, there's going to be growing pains. I mean, the idea of this team relying on its defense after what we saw the last 2 years is a scary proposition, even if you are optimistic about what they're going to put out on the field in terms of new personnel and a new scheme. I still think this season just comes down to one thing more than any other. And then it's not the only thing, but it is the most important thing. And that is the quarterback, because he's an elite level talent. It isn't this way with every team, but with this team, because he is an elite level talent and he's played at an elite level in this league already. He did it through 20 games in his rookie season. The key to this whole season is him. He has to be on the field and he has to play like he is capable of playing. It's not the only thing, because for him to play to the level that he's capable of playing, everything else has to be, at least what it was in 2024, mediocre. We don't have any guarantees it'll be mediocre. But if he's upright and healthy for 17 games, that's your chance to go, as my old friend Steve Zabin would say, go and have yourself a season. And they have to have that. There's just no scenario in which he either doesn't play enough football like last year or plays enough but doesn't play well that you can overcome that and have a positive season. It's a quarterback league. Yes, it's important that the defense be improved because that would be a limiting factor to his greatness if he ends up being great this year and available. You know, there is a limiting factor if the players that are out there with him can't protect him and can't get open when he is protected. But the bottom line is you're not going to win more games than you lose if he's not out there and playing at a high level. This team is dependent on him playing and being really good. If that happens, they've got a chance to win 9, 10 games. If it doesn't, it's going to be 8 or less. But good news is you only play them one at a time, and we get to see the context of this week by week when it begins, believe it or not, 3 weeks from this Sunday. All right, 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. I guess off of, the waffling that I've been doing this week, and it's a fair criticism because I have felt it myself, kind of going back and forth with should they or shouldn't they, should he or shouldn't he. Is there any value truly in Jaden Daniels going out there for a series or two? I think I now kind of am leaning, subject to change, of course, but I'm leaning probably not. If he's going to be out there for a quarter, if he's going to be out there for 15, 20, 25 snaps, that's different than potentially what he did last year, which is he's out on the field for 4 total snaps, 3 handoffs, and a scramble 14-yard run for a touchdown. I actually don't want to see that. I want to see him either handing the ball off or dropping back and throwing the football. My preference would be if he plays, he's out there for a quarter minimum. He's out there for a minimum of, let's just say, 15 snaps. And of those 15, I want him throwing the football on 10 of them, 2/3 of them. If we're going to do this, get him into a game rhythm with Terry and Diggs and Okonkwo. What do you want to see tomorrow? You want to see him? You want to see the starters? What else would you like to have as a result of their second preseason game against the Lions? 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. It's the Kevin Sheehan Show on the Team 980 and the Team980.com. you want to see Jaden Daniels play tomorrow? Yes or no? Why or why not? I've definitely kind of gone back and forth on this. I think I was thinking about this during the break, that over the years, this time of year, because typically we've had quarterback issues, quarterback competitions, but not every year. Every summer wasn't Beck versus Grossman. Every year wasn't, Case Keenum or Dwayne Haskins. Is he going to be ready? But I think for the most part, I've been pretty consistent over the years saying, essentially following my very good friend Doc Walker in football players have to play football. If you're going to be ready for the season, you got to tackle, you got to be tackled, you got to block, you got to be blocked. You have to be in a physical football game and feeling that and the bumps and bruises that come with it. As Quinn said, building the calluses before you are ready to play real football. If the first time you do it is week 1, you're not going to be as ready as you would have been had you been playing football all along. And I think I've always subscribed to that. But is there any value in playing starters for a series or two? What's that value? That's not playing football. That's not adjusting to what happened on your first drive or second drive. I think I pointed this out on yesterday's show. If you go back to that Chargers game, which was the first game back for Jaden following the injury against the Packers last year, it was certainly a game that reminded all of us of what he had been in 2024, but it didn't start that way. The first 2 drives were 3 plays, 5 yards punt, 5 plays, 25 yards punt. 2 punts to start that game. They were down 10-0, and it didn't look good. And then it was lights out the rest of the way, including that bomb to McCaffrey. All the shenanigans at the end of the first half with the punt and everything that happened there, and then the bomb on third down when maybe they could have played it conservatively. But, he ended up throwing for 231, rushing for another 40 yards, had a 75 QBR in the game, looked like he did the year before. But the first 2 drives, terrible. Playing 2 drives is not playing in a football game. If you want to shorten it to a half or, 15 to 20 plays, at least that feels more like a football game. One series could be 5, 6, 7 plays. Last year it was 4 against Cincinnati, and they got him out. What's the point? Where's the benefit to that? Even Quinn struggled to answer that question yesterday from Ben. He talked about it's customized, like it's customized to the players or
I've got it if you want to hear it.
Work you need. What was it?
I've got it if you want to hear it.
Yeah, play the question and that answer, because it wasn't, I didn't think, there was typical Quinn vagueness with the answer.
Hey, Dan, with regards to playing guys, obviously I'm sure as a coach you'd love to play these guys as much as you could, but what's the value proposition of playing one series versus the risk of possibly getting hurt? Like, how much are they getting out of something that short, or do you need to say they're going to play 15 snaps no matter what?
I think you try to customize it as much as you can. From a new system, new team to go against, calls, the routine of the game, of getting ready, of all that, tackling, breaking tackles, all of those, whether I'm a defender or a ball carrier, all those carry weight. I think it's very difficult to, weigh the plus and minuses on this amount of reps or that amount of reps. There's not like a zero-sum part of what we do, not at practice, not the games, anywhere. It's important, Ben, but it's you try to customize it as much as you can to make sure, hey, this is going to be beneficial to help this player play their very best, moving forward. And you try to just do that as often as you can with good sound decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm understanding what he's saying. I mean, it's some players need even just a series. The getting ready for the game and the way you prepare for a game to play in a game, I guess there's some value there. Getting tackled, sometimes in just a series, you're not going to get tackled. I mean, you might not even touch the ball if you're a running back or a receiver. It's not a real football game experience playing one series or even 2. But what do you want to see? Honestly, I don't really at this point. I'm siding with whatever they decide. But I would imagine it's tough for even them. You know, like you have to, have a plan, but that plan's got to be pliable. Like you've got to be able to adjust based on the players you've lost during camp, the amount of work that maybe you thought they were going to get in a practice, but they didn't get. Like earlier this week, there was a padded practice scheduled on Tuesday. They decided not to go padded because he talked about, the decision for the Detroit game would be maybe based on 2 of these practices this week and maybe a little bit of hitting in some of these practices this week, but they only got it for 1 practice. Yeah, I mean, my overarching theme to this is I don't know anywhere near as much as they do, and I'll trust them. But I really do kind of feel right now in the moment, subject to change, there's not a whole hell of a lot of value of putting your starters out there for a series. 301-230-0980. What do you guys think? What do you think, Max?
I mean, you talk about the value proposition, and I remember being in the building watching Jaden play, hoping he would throw a pass, and then he didn't, and he ended up running it in. And I just remember the flutter in my heart as he crossed the line of scrimmage, just knowing that there was a potential chance for him to get hurt. So I understand the hesitance to have him play, but I would like to see him get a little bit of run. I would like to see just how he's going to fit in Blau's offense. I want to see him take snaps under center because that's, going to be a big thing going forward. So I do just want to see him play probably for a series, maybe 2. But outside of that, I feel like he's done enough in camp that we're comfortable rolling him out week 1.
Yeah, they have done a ton of 11-on-11s. For those that have been out there every day, you guys have shared that with me, whether it's some of our beat reporters or some of the fans that have been out there. We have to do a show during the time they've been practicing. We have not had the opportunity to get out there, even though we would have loved to have done a show out there. But they've had a bunch of those. But again, the quarterback's not going to get hit in any of those. Quarterback isn't, playing real football where he is in danger of being, hit blindside by a blitzing outside linebacker. So it's not exactly the same. All right, G from the shop, go ahead.
Yeah, waffle all you want, Sheehan. These people don't know what they talking about, man.
Well, I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to this.
And that's why you can waffle and you can have an opinion, but all the people that's just repeating what everybody else said, I agree with Doc Walker because Doc Walker played real football, but have these people say that because they hear people like Doc Walker say it, like Chris Russell. He just repeats whatever he hears. And the thing is, Sean McVay won a Super Bowl without playing any star players. Bill Belichick played Tom Brady and his stars and won multiple Super Bowls. So what it is you need a ton of luck. You need to prepare right, but you need a ton of luck for NFL football. And that's just point blank period, man. Max just said he got a flutter in his heart when Jaden took that touchdown in last year against Cincinnati. But remember, the defensive back pulled up. The defensive back could have exploded.
He did. I remember that.
He could have hit him.
So everybody on the field knows it's just preseason. So I want to see him play just off of my personal satisfaction. But I'm just tired of hearing the same rhetoric. The schedule is tough this season. Nobody knows what the season is going to be if the schedule is going to be tough because it's day to day and week to week. So just, man, keep waffling. I like pancakes, Sheehan.
I actually love waffles. I'm not going to lie to you. I like waffles and French toast even more than pancakes. These conversations, like I get a lot from, friends and some of you guys as well. It's like, is that really the conversation of the day? Yes. These conversations during this time of year are whatever is top of mind, but God, none of it really matters until they play real games. You don't know anything about any of these teams. I love watching some of these shows on NFL Network, ESPN, where some of these guys, former players, former coaches, former GMs, are so definitive on so many things. And I'm like, God, I'd love to line up and just take your action. I'd book all of your action because they've never, most of those people have never bet on the NFL, which really gives you the perspective, as you just said. It is totally dynamic. It just changes so quickly week to week. When you have a quarterback, when you've got one of those guys, you've got, it's easier to predict that if that guy plays, they're probably going to be pretty good. If Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, if they play, those teams are going to be, pretty decent. Everybody else, who the hell knows? And here we are talking about a series or two.
Sheehan.
Here we talking about practice. What?
Hey, but that's the thing. Doc Walker says you got to play football. The NFL game has changed since Doc Walker was playing in the NFL.
Yeah.
They don't even let you hit that much in practice.
Right.
It's just a money grab for the preseason in the field, about 5 spots, because look at the inter-squad scrimmage. NFL got the audacity to find the Cowboys and whoever else they was playing for the little brawl. You got to I'm good with the inter-squad scrimmages so you can go up against people that you don't know on the day-to-day. But, man, throw the preseason away, man.
Yeah, I'm with you. One of these days we're going to be down to 2 with 18, and those 2 are really going to be insignificant. Thank you, G, from the shop. Let's go to Nick in Virginia Beach. Nick, go ahead.
Hey, what's going on, Kevin? What's up, Max? Thank you guys
you,
for
Nick?
taking my call. Hope you all are well. I'm doing well, man. A little tired. Currently driving all the way back up to school, but we're moving. With that said,
where's school?
I have 2 things. Syracuse.
Oh, okay.
Ooh.
Yeah. Would like to do something that you or Max are doing one day, but we'll see about that. Anyways, with that said, I have 2 things I'd like to see. One thing is more of a side note. I'd like to see this team kick about 3 or 4 field goals. And I'd like to see what Drew Stevens has as a kicker.
Okay. I like that.
But number 2, I would like to see Daniels play, and I'm kind of with Max here, with even if it's just a series or 2, just simply because the last impression that Daniels had on a football field was him throwing an interception and then getting knocked on his rear end, and then he didn't play again. And now he's got a new OC, and he's going to go to the Link, which is one of the best environments in pro football. And if he has the ball, if we get the ball first, and it's, first and 10 at the 35, 15 minutes of the first quarter, and he's taking that call from David Blau for the first time and then going under center for the first time and trying to get into a rhythm. Because I don't know how much his confidence has been rocked by him kind of being forgotten, left off the top 100 list, the whole number 5 situation. It'd be nice, I just imagine, for him at least to at least get some completions under his belt and have some sort of mojo, and not the last pass he's thrown in game action, rather, be an interception and then him getting knocked on his butt. I just think confidence-wise, even as a fan for me, it'd be a little bit more reassuring heading into what is going to be a stout secondary with Mitchell and DeJean and didn't they sign A.J. Terrell too? I mean, that's a loaded secondary.
Well, they got Grenard too, although he might not be ready, in terms of pass rushers. He's been hurt during camp. There's some question as to whether or not he'll be ready for the opener. But yeah, it's, a Vic Fangio defense, which, comes back loaded and actually, fortified with a couple of additional pieces on defense is not, ideal, but it is an opener, and openers are weird, for both teams because of typically the fact that it's the first time you're playing football since last year for most of the players that are on the field. That's part of what goes into the results of week 1 being strange results, being not necessarily predictive of what's going to happen after week 1. Just go to last year. New England got beat at home in the season opener by the Raiders. The Raiders won 3 games, and the Patriots only lost 3. Or was it 4? I forget. Thank you for the call. Appreciate it, Nick in Virginia Beach. Let's go to Ian. Ian, go ahead.
My thought is that the preseason should be abolished. It's an archaic product, and it should not exist in today's NFL.
Well,
Tom
that's never going to
alluded to
happen
it.
because they got to get they right now 20 games, 3 of them in the preseason. They're essentially no costs when it comes to player salaries. So it is a major profit margin opportunity for the owners, even though it's a terrible consumer product.
We agree verbatim, but I think college football is somehow managed forever to do it without a preseason, and I wish the NFL would go to that model. But with that being said, since we do have the games and we do go through it, I totally agree that if I were the head coach, I would play Jaden Daniels for a full half. You have a new offensive coordinator. You have a numerous number of new skill position players. You have consternation on the offensive line. You have to, at some point, you have to practice in a game-like situation. Other teams, some do it, some don't. Obviously, there is not a best practice, if you will, or everybody would do that. Sean McVay takes one approach. Robert Saleh takes a different approach. But for me, the previous caller said, the last time Jaden Daniels played football, it was a long time ago. It was a really long time ago. And I think it would be good for him to actually get hit and feel okay. I think you hear football players all the time saying it almost feels better to get hit and know you're okay than constantly be in fear of getting injured.
Players that go out for that first snap always feel, they say it all the time. And if you played at any level of football, you can even identify with this, which is, the nerves and the butterflies don't go away until you get hit or you hit somebody. And then it's like, all right, I'm okay now. I'm in a football game. Look, where you are is kind of where I am, which, is scary. But I would rather see them play 15, 20 snaps. Maybe that's, a quarter and a half or just more than a quarter, or maybe up to 30 and a first half like they're playing a real football game, or not play at all. One or the other. Because to me, a series or two, I know Dan Quinn talked about, it's custom fit, basically. It's a player-by-player decision.
Yeah.
But here's the other part of the playing a half, is that you're playing against guys, for the most part, that don't necessarily give you a real NFL look, because they're not going to be in the league in most cases.
To me, it's not about the other team. It's about the practice and feel of having a play clock, having your offensive coordinator speak to you, even if you're throwing to wide open receivers and they run 5 yards and go out of bounds. Again, at some point in life, you have to practice what you're going to do in everybody's day-to-day job.
Yeah, I hear you, but it's not
know?
representative of what you're going to see. In terms of the process that you're going through, it'll feel like it and look like it, but without game planning. And by the way, you'd almost, if you're going to play your players for a half, let's just say it's either we're playing real football, they're going to play for a half, or they're not going to play at all. You got to game plan a little bit, because you want to stay on the field. You want to make those reps meaningful. You want them to be, not necessarily replicas of, but at least some similarity with what you would be doing in the regular season. Not to mention that, I threw this out as an example yesterday. Let's just say Aiden Hutchinson is on the field tomorrow. If Jaden's going to be out there for a half and Aiden Hutchinson's out there for even 2 or 3 series, you got to protect him against Aiden Hutchinson, which means you got to plan a little bit. Are we going to chip him? We're going to double him? What kind of plays are we going to run to make sure that he doesn't disrupt the game? So you have to incorporate more planning, more game planning into it if you're going to do it that way. Okay. I'm not saying I would disagree with that. If you're going to do it, do it right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or don't do it.
I agree. And I think there's too much NFL groupthink and bad decisioning making where everybody's like, oh my gosh, if I show anything, the other team's going to know what's happening. Like, not to sound like Doc Walker, if you have a good team, the other team knows you're going to throw to Justin Jefferson. It's okay to just be like,
Yeah,
these
no,
are some of our
I'm
plays.
gonna push back a little bit, but I'm also gonna give the other side, and thanks for the call as always, Ian. And that is, there is absolutely something to be said for heading into the opener with your opponent not being able to truly plan for you based on not having any film of what you're doing this year. That teams that come back with a lot of the same stuff, you've got a pretty good idea. Teams with a new coordinator and a bunch of new players on both sides of the ball, 2 new coordinators in our case, it'll be harder for Philadelphia to prep. But the flip side of that is, yeah, maybe they had a chance to prepare better, but maybe you're more ready to play football because your guys played a half in 2 straight games and built up the thicker skin getting ready for the season. Mark, Jax, anybody else that wants to jump in, we got an open line, 301-230-0980. Do you want to see Jaden Daniels and the starters play tomorrow? Yes, no, why not? Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com. Ben Standing will join us at 12. Joe Gibbs put out a social media directive, which I'm going to read, and we're going to take some calls on next hour. I'm actually looking forward to that. Joe's great. Looks great. Been through a lot, obviously, in his life, but getting active with the fan base in multiple sports. Tune in about 15 minutes for that. This is a call segment that deals with essentially yes or no on Jaden Daniels tomorrow, why or why not. I've kind of waffled this week. A couple of you have picked up on that. I really wanted Jaden Daniels to play and be with his new center, be with his new offensive coordinator, be with his new wide receiver and Stephon Diggs, his new tight end, and Okonkwo, and get sort of a dress rehearsal feel. But then kind of the question that Ben Standing asked Quinn yesterday, like, what's the actual benefit of a series, or two versus the risk of it? A series or two is not playing football. I mean, unless the series first one goes 15 plays, 88 yards, and the second one goes 12 plays and 77 yards. Okay, that's some real football, but play for a half or don't play at all. 301-230-0980. Let's go to Mark in Largo. Mark, go ahead.
I don't think it's really – I think what the real issue is, it's not so much Jaden. It's really more about Allegretti. Because I'm thinking – and I think you're feeling this too, Kevin, just like the rest of the fan base is. If it was up to Jaden probably would have – if Allegretti was really, really healthy, he would have played last week. I think Jaden would have played last week. You wouldn't see him no more for the rest of preseason. But because the uncertainty of him, and if do you really piecemeal it to September 13th, that's fine. I think that's the bigger issue, which is making me irritated with Adam Peters and why he hasn't gone out and got the kid from Detroit, who I know is available right now, that's very familiar with this run scheme, that you can get him to play center,
Reynolds,
to at least be the backup. And I could see that, but I mean, if you're waffling on this is more about your boy Adam Peters and what he hasn't done and stuff. And I just think that
it's an overall for any team. Like, what should the right way be? Every team has done it differently. Is there, all I'm asking, whether it's for our team or any other team, it has nothing to do with Adam Peters, is what Ben asked Quinn. Is there actually any benefit to starters playing a series and then walking off the field? Quinn said there's benefit of preparing for the game and going through the warm-ups in a way in which you'd be going through warm-ups to get ready for the game. And, everybody, situational football, that stuff. But it's a series. That's not real football. Right. Real football is you're out there for 50 to 60, sometimes 65 to 70 offensive snaps. Now, I'm not suggesting they play the whole game, but to get a real feel for football, don't you have to play more than a series? And if you're not going to, what is the real benefit versus the risk? Has nothing to do with even this team to a certain degree. I understand what you're saying with Allegretti. And when I felt earlier in the week like I'd rather see Jaden Daniels and the starters out there, part of it is, look, you got a new center, a new coordinator, you got new things, and it just seems to me it would be beneficial. But is it really if they're just out there for a series? Yeah. I don't know. And by the way, a series which comes 22 days before your first game, you almost have a whole off season before your first game.
And here's the other thing.
Like this one series on August 22nd is going to make a massive difference 22 days later, more than 3 weeks later. I don't know. That's why I'm waffling, because it seems to me like it can't be that overly beneficial. So if you're not going to do it for a lot more than a series, then don't do it. I think that's kind of where I'm coming in today with it. Do you have anything else?
Yeah. Well,
any more Adam Peters shots?
No, I'm not bashing Adam Peters. But here's what I will say. I do think if you notice the last 2 years, Jaden doesn't get off to great starts and that's because he doesn't get a lot of time in preseason. It's usually around about that third game that he starts playing lights out, and it usually comes in and stuff like that.
He didn't get to a
But
third
here's the
game
other thing.
last year. He's only had one season in which he got to a third game. So it's what we call in the trade a very, very small sample size.
Yeah, true. That's true.
Okay.
Have a good weekend, my friend.
All right, you too. Mark and Largo, everybody. Are we taking a break here, Max, top of the hour, or did you just roll that in the last break?
No, we got a break. We got to get the ID in and a few more
right.
spots.
Jax, Zion, we got a phone line open if you want to jump on. Should Jaden Daniels play? Yes or no? Why or why not? Really, it also applies to just kind of the other starters as well. We don't have a firm answer. Quinn did say yesterday some starters are going to play, but he didn't know whether or not Jaden Daniels would play. By the way, I haven't even said this. My actual gut feel is he's going to play a little bit tomorrow. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com. By the way, G, who did call in and had some good points, G from the shop, also just DM'd me. Sean McVay played no stars in preseason and won a Super Bowl. Belichick played Brady in starters and won Super Bowls. Acknowledge that it doesn't matter. You need to prepare and also have luck when it comes to NFL football. I mean, he said some of that during the call. But, yeah, no, the strategies, the preseason strategies go back to when actual teams did play starters a lot. But there was a big difference between team to team. There were some teams that had their quarterbacks out there throwing 20, 25 passes and a half, and other teams that just played their starters for a quarter, in the first, or a quarter in the first preseason game, and then maybe a little bit beyond a quarter in the second. If you go all the way back, I mean, for some of you, this doesn't really matter, but they played 6 of them. They played up until 1978. They played 6 preseason games. But the goal was back then to get into shape, because football wasn't necessarily a full-time job for everybody involved. A lot of the guys had off-season jobs to supplement their football income. And so training camp was about getting into shape as well. I do remember those years, and I remember that the preseason games were bigger, more important, more anticipated, and the results everybody thought mattered. But if you go back even to those days, historically, they didn't mean much either. Washington lost. Now, this was when it was down to 4, but they lost 4 preseason games and won a Super Bowl. They lost 3 preseason games, 1-3, and won a Super Bowl. So there weren't many indications of what was to come in those particular preseasons. All right, Jax, thanks for holding. Go ahead.
Hey, Kevin, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Basically, it doesn't matter to me whether they play the starters or not or whatever. Because I look at it as somebody that's preparing dinner or whatever, and we're the person that's being served or having the luxury of eating the food that we want to smell the food, we want to sample it, and I feel like the preseason is basically about putting the selecting ingredients, prepping ingredients, cooking it, and then giving a presentation. And I think, especially for like Thanksgiving, we want to sample everything before we actually get the full meal. And then the first
you're going through quite the exercise, and you're making everybody hungry. So
I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but yeah, no, I get what you're trying to say, and
yeah,
I think that only these coaches and these that really know the teams and can see it in their eyes as to whether or not they need to go out and get hit, or they need to go out and prepare like they're going to play a game, or they need to, run some routes, with the offensive coordinator, with the play clock ticking down, et cetera. All of that is, is stuff they kind of understand. I think, though, I have definitely arrived at, and again, I am open to other thought, but I've arrived at a series doesn't make any difference. Like, what's the point? Like, if you're gonna try to dress rehearsal, if you're gonna try to put a meal together, let them go out and and taste it and hang around and have some good conversation with their guests for a half or at least more than a quarter. Thanks, Jax. Let's go to Robert in Annapolis. Robert, go ahead.
Well, good morning. In your team situation, I would say, with the exception of Daniels, perhaps, the whole first team units, offense and defense, you play, if not the whole first half, at least a good portion of it. You got to get in sync. You got an offensive line. It's got to get accustomed to each other, know where each guy's going and things of that nature. Same on defense. You got new coaches. So it depends on the team situation. Team over here probably doesn't need to do that. They got a lot of guys coming back in the same position. So, of course, I do remember that Burt Jones' career essentially ended when he got slammed in 1978 in the preseason game. So there's always a risk with that.
Sonny separated a shoulder in a preseason game and was lost for the beginning of the year. We've seen quarterbacks go down in the preseason. I'm sure.
Well, Burt was never the same. Burt was never the same after he injured a shoulder against Detroit in 1978. He was never the same player that he had been for the 3 previous years. So there is that risk. But, something I wanted to comment quick if I have time. when the scheduling is set up like this, you would think the NFL would schedule the least important games, let's say the non-conference games early in the season, because they are sort of, extended preseason games. I don't know why they haven't played division foes right off the bat.
Well, not everybody plays a division foe in week one.
Well,
there's a ton of interconference. I mean, Patriots Seahawks is the first game. Look, I'll add it up for you right now. 49ers Rams is 1.
Well, your team.
I'll get to them. I'm just going through the entire thing because Packers, Vikings, Washington, Philly, Cowboys, Giants, Broncos, Chiefs. So out of the 16 week 1 games, 5 are division matchups. Week 2, you brought up something I'm actually interested in, which is why I'm looking at it. Week 2, Viking 1, 2. 2.
Well, I don't even know who the Ravens play.
3, 4, 5. Same. So the first 2 weeks, we're talking about 5 out of the 16 games are division matchups. That's probably an average of every year. I mean, you play a lot of the AFC, NFC games in those first few weeks. But anyway, go ahead. What else do you have?
Anyhow, I guess the point is here with your team, I don't think it's going to be beneficial for the Commanders team to go into Philadelphia having not had some real game, if we're going to call this real game.
Philly's not playing any of their guys either. I mean, we don't know what they'll do this week, but they didn't play anybody last week.
I'm talking about the opening day, the first game. You're going to Philadelphia. Don't you want these new starters, the draft picks, the new acquisitions to have played with each other?
But the point is, Robert, is playing together and is dress rehearsal. Does 1 series or 2 series count? I think I'm on the either play them for a half or don't play them at all.
Well, that's what I said. Play them, if not for the whole first half, a few drives, 2-3 drives, see what they can do. There you go.
Take it into the second quarter at least, depending on how
we're in agreement.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's where I am now. I am. And you're risking injury. But you know what? The injuries could happen early in the first quarter of week 1 anyway. All right. Thank you, Robert. Zion, if that's how you pronounce it. Zion, go ahead.
Yeah. What's going on, man?
How are you?
My philosophy is very old school. I'm one who's been watching football since 1980. And I remember guys going through 2-a-days and all of that violent practicing, and their careers lasted much longer. You didn't have as many soft tissue injuries happening to guys across the entire league. Now, they say your game's faster. You got more athleticism and all of this stuff. Yes, that's true. But at the same time, football is a brutal game, and I feel like it's got to be played full contact at least once before the season starts. You should get a full half in. One full half. Even if it's the last preseason game leading into the season or the one that we are at now, second to the last. Ramp it up all the way. Give them a full half, full football, so that way they're ready when it's time, because we don't want to go into Philadelphia unfamiliar with how we play as a team full go.
Thanks for the call. I don't mind that strategy at all. I actually don't. Again, I got to write this one down so I remember it for next August. And that is either play them for, 20 snaps, 15 plus snaps, 20 plus snaps, or don't play them at all. I actually found a list of some of the most devastating injuries in NFL to happen during the preseason. And the truth is, most of them have happened before the last couple of years. Although Tunsil will get added to that list, although it did not happen in an actual preseason game. I'll give you some of those when we come back. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, theteam980.com. Don't forget, you can watch this show on our Team 980 YouTube channel. If you are watching us on the YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button and hit the like button. It really helps us out a lot. Our Waldorf Honda poll of the day, our Twitter poll of the day. Do you want to see Jaden Daniels play tomorrow versus the Lions, even if it's only for a series or two? At this point, 80.6% of you say yes, play him, even if it's only for a series or two. All right, then. Kevin Sheehan Show. Back in a moment. during a preseason game against the Baltimore Ravens, Atlanta Falcons quarterback Michael Vick on August 16th, 2003, broke his leg, missed the first 12 games of the season. They went 2-10 during those games. Season over. Michael Vick, by the way, that was the year, I believe, he was on the cover of Madden. Look that up. I'm pretty sure that's true because I think that was the first of the Curse Madden covers with Vick. Another famous preseason game injury, 1999. Remember, Trent Green had signed with the Rams after playing well for the Skins and Norv Turner in 99. He tore his ACL in a preseason game on a hit by Rodney Harrison in a game against the Chargers. Of course, that led to Kurt Warner, who had been bagging groceries at an Iowa Hy-Vee supermarket just 9 months earlier. He went on to have one of the greatest and most shocking and unexpected seasons in NFL history when he won the MVP and led the Rams and the greatest show on turf to the Super Bowl. Tony Romo in 2016 in a preseason game fractured a vertebrae in his lower back after being hit by a Seattle pass rusher. The injury sidelined him for the first half of the year, giving Dak Prescott a chance as a rookie to start, and he never looked back. The Cowboys started off 10-1 that season, ended up going on to the playoffs. They won a game, and then they lost a game in the postseason. Other famous injuries, Kajana Carter was the number 1 pick in the 1995 draft. The running back from Penn State got picked by Cincinnati, tore his ACL in a preseason game against Detroit, and he never did regain what they thought he would have. He did have a decent stretch of football for our Redskins in 2001 when Marty Schottenheimer turned an 0-5 start into an 8-3 finish, and Kajana Carter was a big part of that. The worst injury of all time, and actually this was one I didn't even know of, is Stone Johnson, a player for the AFL's Kansas City Chiefs in 1963, had a severe neck injury in a preseason game on a kickoff return and died. I don't think I've ever heard that story. I've heard about a couple of the deaths during NFL games. There was a player who played for Detroit in the 70s that died during a regular season game. But I do remember very, very much so Darryl Stingley, and I know that many of you of a certain age remember Darryl Stingley as well. 1978 wide receiver for the Patriots, and a pretty good one, taking a big hit in a preseason game from Jack Tatum of the Raiders. There's still a question as to whether or not that was a dirty hit. Back then, it wasn't necessarily considered dirty. Chuck Fairbanks, the coach of the Patriots, even said he thought the hit was legal. It ended up being paralyzed and ended up a quadriplegic after that. That was a massive, massive sports story and news story for the time. That happened during a preseason game. Jamal Lewis in 2001, he had helped the Ravens the previous year to a Super Bowl as a rookie. The next preseason, he tore his left ACL in a practice, and he did come back from that and have some very good seasons. There are some of the most famous injuries during the preseason in NFL history. Oh, the Rams, if you recall, in 2014 had drafted Sam Bradford at number 1 overall. He tore his ACL in a preseason game against the Browns. It was his second torn ACL. It had happened earlier, a year earlier as well. Yeah, those are some of the worst injuries ever during this time of year. Let me just see. Oh, Teddy Bridgewater in a training camp practice 2016 was supposed to be the starter for the Vikings, and he ended up dislocating a knee in a non-contact drill, had ACL damage as well, and missed the following season. Yeah, happens. Certainly, Mike Vick and Trent Green are two. Now, you didn't know it at the time with Trent Green. You knew it with Michael Vick. It was a devastating blow to not only the Falcons, but really the NFL season, where people were so excited to see Michael Vick come back and quarterback the Falcons. Trent Green, nobody knew what the Rams were missing, and as it turns out, they weren't missing much, although Trent Green went on to have a good career, just not in St. Louis, in Kansas City. So there you go. Some of the worst preseason injuries in NFL history. All right. Do you have that Gibbs sound? Okay. So Joe Gibbs on Twitter, this was yesterday on Twitter, put out a tweet. I had it up in front of me 2 seconds ago. Give me 1 second. Put up a tweet yesterday at Coach Joe Gibbs is his X account, with an attached video. I'll read what he wrote, but let's listen to the video first from our favorite Coach Joe.
If you were choosing your O-line, would you rather have 5 guys who are dominant run blockers or 5 guys who never give up a sack?
It better be both. Or I don't want either one of them, to tell you the truth. No, you got to be able to do both. And that's why we appreciate offensive linemen so much. Okay, first of all, you got to be smart. They got to look at different defenses, have the right blocking combinations, make the calls to their teammates. All those things are involved with it. But listen, you're not going to win football games if you can't run the football. I mean, you got to be physical and run it. But then again, the great part about football is not only physically running it, but it's the skill of the passing game. And in that case, you got to keep those guys from killing the quarterback. Okay, so that's you can't have one without the other. So I want both. That's the answer to that question. I want both.
All right. Why was Coach Joe putting out a video with a question that he answered in great detail? He wrote in his tweet yesterday, "We're kicking off a new series where I'll be answering questions from you each week. Anything from football and racing to faith, life, and everything in between. Drop your question in the comments and we'll pick a couple each week for me to answer." Coach Joe getting into social media, getting into interaction on social media. I love it. First of all, Coach Joe in this video, he looks great. Everything he's been through, family-wise, race team-wise, obviously in recent months. And he looks fantastic. And there are a lot of questions. And I've had Coach Joe on the show countless times over the last many years. And I'll sneak in some of the questions that I really want to ask, that I've always wanted to ask. And sometimes he answers them. And sometimes, he gives the Coach Joe laugh and say, "I'm not going there, Kevin." I think the last time he was on, he accused me of stirring up something, which was untrue. I think he had me confused with Zabe. But anyway, my question to all of you is, and we'll open up phone lines for this at 301-230-0980. If you had one question, because you do now, and maybe he'll pick your question, one question for one of the greatest coaches in the history of the NFL, and for the greatest coach with no second place, really, that's anywhere near number one in our city's history, what would you ask him? 301-230-0980. 301-230-0980. Coach Joe's taking questions on social media. Let me read a few of them, and I'll give you mine coming up. But there were, a number of like Redskins related questions. One from Chris. He said, "Hey, Coach, I have 100 questions, but I'll only ask one. How often do you reflect on past Redskins players, the really special ones like Sean Taylor? It was heartbreaking that he passed away, and we never really got to see what he was going to become. Your words and actions during that time were just as important as all of the winning in the 80s. I like that question. This was another one from Dre. Joe, tell us about your relationship with John Madden. I reached out to Coach when John Madden passed away, and he came on, but he came on, I think, like 2 or 3 weeks later. But they were together under Don Coryell, but together before even that. They've known each other forever. But Dre asked, Joe, tell us about your relationship with John Madden. I always loved hearing that story about you all at San Diego State under Don Coryell. There are a number of, I had another one. From Sir Lorick. Hey, Joe, do you believe the replacement players in 1987 that won 3 regular season games deserve Super Bowl rings? Yeah. There are a lot of them here. I'm going to give you my top 3 questions for Coach Joe. I think I've asked some of these, so I'm trying to come up with some that I haven't asked as well. But what would be the one question you would ask Joe Gibbs? You can do it now. You can follow him on X at Coach Joe Gibbs. 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com. All right, 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. Joe Gibbs is taking questions on Twitter at Coach Joe Gibbs. Weekly, he's going to, or somebody will, on his behalf, review the questions that come in. They can be on anything from football and racing to faith, life, and everything in between. And weekly, he's going to answer those questions via Twitter in a video. I love it. I've had a chance to have Joe on the show many times over the years. I've asked him a lot of the questions I'm going to mention right now. Some he's answered, but I'm really focused on the ones that he's really never answered concrete, in a concrete way. 301-230-0980. So let me start with this. There's always been a question about the best team that he had. He is always hesitant to answer that question. I've asked him many times, so your best team. And he'll, I can't, it's like picking your favorite child. But he has leaned occasionally over the years towards an answer that I think is the answer he would give if he were injected with truth serum, which is the 91 team. Because I don't think it's even close. I think the 91 team is one of the greatest teams in NFL history. And a lot of the advanced numbers will tell you that. We've seen that before, that the 91 Redskins, while maybe perception-wise by NFL fans aren't thought of that way, the analytics, the advanced numbers will tell you the 91 Skins are one of the greatest teams in NFL history. Combined offense, defense, special teams. They were dominant. Now, people will say, you played, Atlanta and Detroit. There were no Niners. There were no Bears. There were no Cowboys. There were no Giants, in the postseason. But the postseason was what it was. You can only play the teams that are there in front of you. And they demolished Atlanta 24-7, the seat cushion game. Blew out the Lions 41-10 in the NFC Championship game, and then won the Super Bowl 37-24. But let's be fair, that game was never close. It was 31-3. It was 37-10, and Buffalo scored some late touchdowns to make the score respectable. That was an absolute beatdown in the Super Bowl. They had games during that season. They had shutouts early in the season against Detroit and against Philly. Their defense was dominant. Somebody asked me on Twitter the other day, because we were talking about some of the best Redskins team of all time that didn't get to the Super Bowl. And I talked about some of the teams in the 70s. Somebody said, what's the best defensive team that the franchise has ever had? You could go back to some of George Allen's teams, like the 72 team, but the 91 defense was the last great defense that this franchise had. This franchise hasn't had many good defenses over the years. I mean, a lot of bad defensive play. 2005, 2007, 2022, those were good defenses, but they weren't anywhere near the 91 defense. The 91 defense was lockdown. So I would definitely want him, if he's now being very open and honest, to say which of the teams that he coached was the best and then why. I'd love to hear him describe the 91 team if that's the answer. Some people would actually say the 83 Skins that lost the Super Bowl may have been the best team. That may have been the best offensive team in franchise history, but it wasn't the best overall team. The 91 team was. I'd want to ask him about the game that he thinks that he lost, that he thinks about more than any other. There are so many during the course of his career that could be the answer to that question, including the very last game he coached in Joe Gibbs version 1-0, the playoff game against San Francisco. Man, there was a real feeling as that game went on that this heart of a defending champion was going to get it done, and they were going to be one game away from the Super Bowl again, even though their regular season didn't go well compared to the previous year. The Raiders' Super Bowl loss, that could be obviously the game. It could be a number of losses to the Giants or the Cowboys. But I'd like to know what game that he lost as a head coach does he think about more than any other that hurt him the most? And then here's the last one, because this is one I've never asked him before, but I've thought about this before, but I don't think I've ever gotten to it with him. And that is, when Joe got the job in 1981, first of all, nobody knew who Joe Gibbs was. Back then, you didn't know a lot about coordinators. He was the offensive coordinator for Coryell's Chargers, and the 1980 Chargers were unbelievable offensively, one of the highest scoring teams in the league. They got to the AFC Championship game, played it, by the way, at home in a driving Southern California rainstorm, and lost to the Raiders 34-27. The Raiders were the wild card in the AFC that year, and the Raiders went on to beat the Eagles in the Super Bowl. But they were an incredible offensive team. Dan Fouts, John Jefferson, Kellen Winslow, Charlie Joyner, Chuck Muncie in the backfield. They threw the ball all over the field. It was one of the truly innovative, out there NFL offenses that anybody had ever seen from a passing standpoint. So he gets hired, he comes to Washington, and in 1981, that's what they start out doing. They're throwing the ball all over the park. They're throwing it against Dallas in the opener. Joe Theismann's dropping back 50 times, and they start off 0-5, and then Riggo takes over. My question would be, I think everybody who is a lifelong Redskin fan remembers that he had to go to Kansas to talk Riggins into coming out of retirement to come back. And Gibbs laughs when he tells the story about walking in, and John's got, 2 beers, one for his left hand, one for his right hand, drinking them both, pretty shattered, at the kitchen table at his home in Kansas. And he says to Gibbs, "You need me a lot more than I need you." But I'm wondering why Gibbs, in that moment, felt like he needed Riggins so much. Of course, Riggins was a great player. The 79 season, he was incredible, and he ended up not coming back for 80 because of the way the 79 season ended. But he was going to throw the ball all over the park. He wasn't going to run it with a big, burly, halfback / fullback. Chuck Muncie was his big-time back in San Diego. He rushed for like 600 yards. That was it, and caught a bunch of passes. He had Joe Washington in they ended up getting Joe Washington, and Joe Washington was playing a lot more early in the season than Riggo was. Riggo in his first 4 games, 8 carries, 6 carries, 9 carries, and 13 carries. Part of it was they were getting beat and had to throw it, but part of it was they started off throwing it. I'd actually like to know, when he walked out of there, was he close to saying, "Yeah, we don't need him. I don't need this," the line about, this guy's a wingnut, or whatever the line was from Gibbs about Riggo. But I'm surprised, and I'm thankful for it. And we all wanted Riggo back in the moment because of what Riggo meant even to the teams in the 70s that he was a part of, especially the 79 team. But the way the Chargers played football, Riggins wasn't a great fit for the Chargers. So why was he going to be a great fit for the Redskins under Joe Gibbs? Now, Joe Gibbs proved his genius in that he realized we're not built to throw the ball 50 times a game. We're built to hand the ball off to somebody like John Riggins and win as a run-first team. And at 0-5 against the Chicago Bears in Week 6, they handed the ball off to John Riggins, and he had 23 carries for 126 yards, 2 touchdowns. They won the game, and that sparked an 8-win in their final 11-game stretch to finish 8-8. And then it carried over the following year in a Super Bowl win. That is something I'd be interested in talking through with him, to get him to kind of explain, given what he was planning on being as a head coach and as an offensive head coach, why was it so critical to bring Riggo back? Thank God he did. 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. What's the one question you would ask Coach Joe. Let's start with Kevin in Arlington. Kevin, go ahead.
Hey, Kev. Happy Friday. Thank you for taking my call. Kevin, there was, two things. First of all, when Joe came out of retirement, those early days when we were all shocked and thrilled in 2004, there had been some rumors about Bobby Beathard might come out and join the party as well. I'd like to know a little bit more about that, but more so what I would like to know
Bottom line was Vinny had to go or Bobby wasn't coming back. And Bobby wasn't – Bobby felt about Snyder early on what everybody else would eventually find out. And he just wasn't necessarily interested in working for him.
Okay, good to know. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I also know that Bobby DePaul, who was an assistant coach and has the ring from the 91 team,
right,
who went on and did some really good things for the Bears. Remember, they went to the Super Bowl in 06.
Right.
Was someone Gibbs thought the world of. And there had been rumors that he wasn't happy with what happened in 04 with Vinny and the player acquisition, and that he was thinking about trying to pry Bobby DePaul away from Chicago. It didn't happen, but I to this day, I guess even if somehow Snyder, who didn't say no to Coach Joe, would have, either put Vinny off to the side or fired him altogether, I don't know if Joe could have won even more had he had DePaul, not Vinny counseling him. But I would like to know more about that, because I felt like the only chance we ever had to win a Super Bowl under Snyder, who was just awful,
was Gibbs.
Was with Joe.
Yeah.
And if Joe had had more help in the front office. That's all.
And Kevin, I think you and I would both agree on this. Coach Joe's the greatest coach ever. He was not great necessarily with his GM responsibilities. He wasn't Rivera, but that wasn't necessarily what he was great at doing. And look, we'll never know how much Dan and Vinny influenced some of those decisions when he came back. But he incorporated them into the decision-making process when it came to personnel. He did.
Yeah, he was a consensus seeker, and not only them, but Greg Williams. Greg was given the, was given Carlos Rogers, for example, when Aaron Rodgers was home, for example.
Yeah.
Anyway, like to know more about that, but it was great to see Joe in that clip, and God bless him. All right, have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too, Kev. Let's go to Joe in Springfield. Joe, you got one question for Coach Joe because he's taking them now on Twitter. What's your question?
Hey, Kevin, how you doing?
Good, Joe.
So I was going to go back to before the 1987 season. Joe Gibbs had just told Doug Williams that he was going to trade him to the Raiders, but then the last minute he decided to change it, and then he said that I just got a feeling that somewhere down the line you were going to lead us to greatness. And
Doug was not happy.
Did he say right? Well, he wasn't happy at the time, but when Joe Gibbs said that, was he indicating to Doug that he was rather trusting Doug Williams than Jay Schrader himself? Because Jay Schrader did not like that Doug Williams was going to be around. If you remember at the end of the season, when he named Doug Williams the starter and they went on that playoff run, Jay Schrader, I think, if I'm not mistaken, made it public that he was not thrilled about it. And then at the end, they traded Jay Schrader, and we got Jim Lachey in return after that season. So I'm curious to know,
the 88 summer before the season started is when the Schrader for Lachey trade happened. Yeah, I mean, delving into that deeper, what made him have that, night sleep and wake up the next morning and say, I can't trade Doug, I'm going to need him? I mean, you might get, a religious answer from Joe on that. But yeah, sure. Look, I think that with Schrader, there was a lot about Schrader that was enticing and exciting, the athleticism, the arm strength. But Joe always liked his quarterbacks super smart, as he would say. And that wasn't Schrader. That was Doug. That was Rip. That was Joe. And that may be a hard thing for him to answer. Plus, I will tell you, Jay was not a popular, teammate on those teams. Doug was. So there was
And his
that as
teammates
well.
love
The
Doug
natural
teammates love Doug
leadership
Williams more
part.
than Jay Schroeder.
Doug was a much better leader. Jay was not a leader
For sure.
on those teams. So, yeah, that would be a good one to find out if he would actually open up about the differences between Schrader and Williams and what concerned him about Schrader, which is why ultimately he decided not to trade Doug to the Raiders. Thanks, Joe, for that. Let's go to Ken in Upper Marlboro. Ken, go ahead. All right, let's go to Billy in Chantilly. Billy, go ahead. Billy? Hello, Billy.
Joe there. Yeah, Kevin.
Go ahead, Billy.
This team, and I hate to say the quiet part out loud. This team was unwatchable for 2 decades. As a lifelong fan, as you are, we've had a change in ownership, and the reality is now going into year 4 with the ownership, the team is middle of the pack culture-wise as far as the league goes. So I want to know from Joe, and if it wasn't for Jaden Daniels, who knows where we'd be? And I want to know from Joe, who's owned NASCAR teams and built cultures, how do we get this culture back? Look, it's never going to be the same, but how do we get it back to close to where it was back then? Because the future is...
Yeah, he knows a lot about successful cultures. Yes.
That's right.
What's interesting, Billy, he's probably talked more openly and honestly because Joe holds a lot back. Joe's never going to give you a controversial answer. Never has.
Without a doubt.
And he doesn't like it if he feels like you're trying to get to something that would be headline material. Joe was the last to create headlines during the course of a week as a head coach, and he hasn't wanted to do it since. But I think one of the things that he's talked about extensively, he's written about it in books, is the building of a culture. And he always says, you just have to pick the right people. And he's gone into detail about that. They got to be smart. This has got to be their, they got to have their priorities, but they've got to live this. And Joe's always been great at picking people. He's always been great at picking people.
Well, let's get some of that up to the front office, please. Some of that quality. And by the way, I'm sure inside the locker room, there was no more honest and forthright and open communicative person than Joe Gibbs. With the media, it was one thing. Externally, it was one thing. I promise you, all those guys loved him. So thanks.
Well, yeah, they did, and they understood him. But there are former players, because I've talked to a lot of them over the years, that said a lot of what you got from Joe in public, sometimes you got there. But what Joe is really good at, making sure that a season was never over. One of Joe's best attributes was his teams got better and better as the season went along, and they were playing their best football at the end of the year and then heading into the postseason. And I've heard all those guys talk about, we may have been 4-3 or whatever, and Joe comes in with the standings and he's breaking down the playoffs and always kept us in it and always kept us ready for each week. Joe understood before it was popular to even describe the NFL this way, that the NFL was week to week, that anybody could beat you if you weren't totally prepared. And that's what we used to get publicly, right, from Joe. Like, they'd be 2 touchdown favorites over the Cardinals, and Joe would be telling you that they're in deep, deep trouble because Neil Lomax and Roy Green can light us up. And if all 55,000 aren't there and aren't, loud and ready to go, we're going to get blown out by the Cardinals. And then, the final score would be 42-10. And you're like, after a while, it's the boy who cried wolf. But we got it with Joe. We understood that's what he was. Joe was the absolute number one all time at under-promising and over-delivering. And that's what the organization was, man. They were not about telling you. They were about showing you during the Joe Gibbs era. And that's what made the Snyder era so repulsive for so many of us that lived through Gibbs, is that Snyder was the king of overpromising and under-delivering. Joe is the opposite. Ben Standig next.
Sunday's the problem.
Yeah. Ben Standig's is next. All right, Ben is with us, as he is every Monday and Friday. Be heading to Detroit, right? Are you going to Detroit tonight, tomorrow morning?
I am not going.
You're not going. It's a preseason game. Why would you?
Look, from a purely business perspective, as a guy who's doing his own thing, I got to factor in. I go to London this year, San Francisco, Arizona over Thanksgiving. So got to pick and choose battles. I want to go to all the bigger games. But yeah, honestly, I don't think a lot of people are going on the beat for this one. got to, somewhere you got to pick your battles, and going to Detroit in week 2 of preseason, it may not be the one.
All right. What we're going to get to tomorrow. I also want to ask you some Wizards questions because they made a trade the other day, and I've kind of been saving that conversation for you. Ben not only covers our football team extensively through his Substack, Last Man Standing, but he covers the Wizards as well. Linked to Last Man Standing by following Ben on X at Ben Standing. So, I don't know if you saw this, but Joe Gibbs put out a video on X and said, we're kicking off a new series where I'll be answering questions from you each week, anything from football and racing to faith, life, and everything in between. Drop your question in the comments, and we'll pick a couple each week for me to answer. You've probably, interviewed Joe a bunch of times. I've had him on the show many times over the years. Is there a question that maybe you haven't asked or you haven't heard asked that you'd love him to answer? By the way, we know Joe. Joe can deflect with the best of them when he doesn't want to answer a question. But if he was going to answer the question truthfully and directly, what would you ask him?
Oh, kind of want to know, which player made him drop some choice words he wouldn't otherwise use in his life.
Dexter, Gary Clark.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm like a sort of like a bigger picture sense. I'm always fascinated by, we see so many coaches in all sports who have a plan, they have a system, they're not going to deviate from it because the plan works. We kind of had that a little bit here the last couple of years with Cliff Kingsbury, right? And it doesn't always work out that way. And Joe Gibbs, the guy that came in with the Air Coryell, okay, here they go, gonna throw it around. They go 0-5. He's like, okay, hold on, let me reset. And he looks and's like, you know what? I think I got an offensive line. I got this running back. Let me pivot. And that is ultimately, to me, what has defined him as beyond obviously the winning, but like he was willing to do that. And then he, of course, they fluctuated later in the tenure. He goes back to being more of a deep ball passer with the running game. So just the idea, like, how did he make that decision? You're only 5 games into your first head coaching job. You really going to throw away to some degree the things that were perceived to be who you are, what was the defining aspect of your coaching, and to say, now we'll do something else. I think that just incredible levels of humility. Spurrier would never have done that. Cliff wasn't doing that. Lots of guys don't do that. And that he did it and became, one of the best ever. I think I always been wondering, what was that decision like for him to have to sit there and think, okay, I got to do this.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, Joe looked at what he had and then designed a plan around what he had. It wasn't about taking one system and saying, learn the system and play my system well. One of the questions that I talked about, because it what you just described about that first season, if you recall, before that first season, the famous trip out to Kansas to convince John Riggins to come back and play football. What's interesting about that whole thing, and it's been, documented about how Riggo was, basically already shattered at 10 in the morning with a beer in each hand and said to Gibbs famously, you need me more than I need you. By the way, he was right to a certain extent. But why did Gibbs in that moment feel like he needed Riggo? He was bringing Air Coryell to Washington, and that's the way they started. Theismann was throwing it 40 to 50 times a game during that 0-5 start. He wasn't planning on handing the ball off and being a run team with a big, burly halfback fullback. He had, Chuck Muncie only had like 600 yards rushing the year before. They were throwing it around the park with Fouts and Jefferson and Winslow and Charlie Joyner. And what's interesting is how, he, laughed and he said, what am I getting myself into after that meeting with Riggo? But I'd be curious as to why he felt he needed him so much. I'm glad he did. It worked out well. And those of us that remember Riggo before Gibbs arrived, we wanted Riggo back. But with what he was planning on doing, why did he feel like this guy's a bit crazy, but I need him?
No, it's a good point. I mean, look, obviously Riggo was a very talented player, right? I mean, he was a first round pick and all this stuff, but he was getting used as like a fullback. He wasn't being used in a way that made logical sense for the talent. Again, maybe that goes back to the idea of having a thought in the system and not adjusting to the reality. And, Gibbs, I mean, look, as a pure talent coming, Gibbs is coming in. He's like, hey, why don't we just get who are the best players we have? Oh, wait, we still have access to this guy? Oh, wait, well, let's just go do it from a talent perspective. And maybe it is a sign of his brain was more flexible from the jump. Like, obviously you don't just in 5 weeks decide, oh, I have to make changes. You have to kind of come in with an attitude of, okay, we're going to start here and then we'll adjust. And he's looking at it like, well, this guy's just really good. So let's get him into the building and we'll figure it out. And maybe ultimately that's where they landed on.
I mean, let me just say also, because John would say it, John was capable of catching the ball out of the backfield. He did it really in New York more than he had done it in Washington with Namath. But the 79 season in particular, when he had his best rushing season of his career, then they lost to Dallas, and that's why he decided he was hanging it up, because they lost, I think, the most gut-wrenching regular season loss in regular season Redskins history. But he did catch, 30 balls or something like that year, which was, not insignificant for a running back in 1979. But anyway, we move on. He looks good. Coach Joe looks good, and that'll be fun to see him on a weekly basis answering these questions. All right, so let's get to what you think we're going to see tomorrow. Who's going to play, who isn't?
Well, let me just start with the defense. I think the defense is a little bit easier. I feel like the back seven, we should probably see almost all those guys. I mean, even Frankie Louvu, right? He's the green dot guy. You got to actually do it, right? Go through the process, even if it's just to make sure all the mechanics are right. So I would think the back seven guys play. That's also areas where they don't have a ton of injuries. Trey Amos aside, it's a largely healthy area. The defensive front gets a little more interesting. I can't imagine we're going to see Oweh or Chase on, since they weren't out of practice the last few days. Tim Settle has still been out, so I can't imagine he will play. So that kind of brings to, do you I don't want to say risk, but do you play Daron Payne and Javon Kinlaw now, knowing that you're a bit thinner at defensive tackle? I think Payne's look good enough in camp that maybe I don't think that you need to, but that would be my only wonder really there is, do those guys play?
Didn't he get banged up the other day?
He did, and I guess maybe that does rule it out. We don't know to the degree. All these injuries of the I just think that the training staff is probably being very conservative with some of their choices, which I'm not saying is wrong. So yes, I mean, to that end, you're right. If he's got an injury and it's something that I think is notable enough, then maybe he is just flat out, and that that does not help the linebackers, right? They want the blockers to take the tackles to take on blockers, and now if you're saying no Payne, no Settle, Newton, maybe not as big of a loss right now, but like still that. So that could be interesting. But anyway, I think generally everybody would probably play on defense, but again, except for the guys that we know are hurt, and right, Payne is somewhere on that list. The offensive side, I think, is where obviously it gets more interesting. I know Dan Quinn said the other day that with Jaden Daniels playing, it would come down to who else is available. And it was like kind of weird, because I'm like, wait a minute, Nick Allegretti, you've already ruled out. And I don't necessarily know at that moment who else we're talking about. But I did hear Logan Paulson on the Take Command podcast say that he thinks that that person may be, in fact, Rachaad White, because the fact that who I don't think he's going to play, because, you want that running back who's able to pass block. That's been the whole, it's one reason why Jeremy McNichols made the team last year and why he's been around. But now no Rachaad White, no McNichols. And watching practice yesterday, Bill, who looked really good catching the ball out of the backfield, there was a play where he caught a ball on the flat, turned up the sideline, and seemed to pull up a little bit after the run, and kind of just like hobbled back a little bit to the sideline. Now, he seemed in great spirits after practice. I spoke with him there, and there was no mention of that. But if there's even just a hint of anything, maybe he doesn't play either. So could that be the tipping point for Jaden Daniels, that all of a sudden you're looking at a running back room of Katron Allen, Robert Henry, and guy they just brought signed over here, Craig Reynolds? That might be a reason to sit Jaden. At the moment, I'm going to lean toward he plays, because I think they do at some point need to get these guys out there. You need David Blau to be able to go through the process. I mean, maybe it's 3 plays, maybe it's 2. I don't know how many plays it is. Maybe they tell Jaden, for God's sake, if you run for any reason other than you're getting blitzed, we're going to punish you. But other than that, I could see it happening unless you want to tell me that the running back situation spooks them enough that they're like, nah, we can't risk the free blitzer coming in, and we're not going to do it.
By the way, I think that's an interesting piece of information about Rachaad White. I just think that they're counting on him to be a big part of this season, especially early in the season. Real quickly, because I did not read from this and didn't see this earlier in the show, but the Lions are probably going to play some select starters, according to Dan Campbell, but Jared Goff is not going to play. Josh Dobbs is going to start the game. Apparently, they've had a bunch of padded practices recently, and they are fine with that. Now, I've referenced the question that you asked Dan Quinn yesterday multiple times, yesterday and today, because I don't know where I've stood in multiple spots this year. Play him this week. Play him. Don't play him if it's just going to be a series. When you asked Quinn to kind of describe the benefit of a series versus the risk of being out there for a series, it just hammered home to me like a series is not a dress rehearsal. 2 series really, unless you've got a 14 play and a 17 play drive. You're either going to play them for, call it 15, 20 plus snaps, or maybe you shouldn't at all, especially if you're not going to game plan for it, especially if you don't know who you're playing. I thought that was an interesting question. He didn't really give you specific, it's kind of a lot of his answers are that way, but he talked about, customizing, for players and situations. And I think that the more I think about it, if you're not going to play him for a quarter plus, don't play him.
Yeah, I think that's just generally where I'm at. Like, we always hear, for every game or a real game, the offensive coordinator scripts the first 15 plays, whatever. Okay, could you commit to that, so to speak, right? Let David Blau call the first 15 plays and say, let's go do this. Again, you got to tell Jaden you're not running. Whatever's going to happen, you got to throw the ball away. And maybe there's something to that. I think the biggest thing that Quinn was saying was that there's like, okay, one, you want to go through the ritual of the game day. And I talked to other former players about this as well, that there is something to be said for getting ready for the season in the parts that we don't see. What time do you need to arrive? What time do you need to start getting dressed, get taped up? When do you do your warm-ups? So go through that process. But then secondly, it's the basics, like getting hit and tackle and hitting somebody. Practice can only simulate so much. It does not simulate that because there's no tackling. So, you want Sonny Styles.
Does one series? The one series last year was 3 handoffs and a scramble for 14 yards for a touchdown for him. That was it. Did that really? And then the other part of this, let me just mention this. I don't want to lose this thought. Once they get done with their series or two, there are 22 days before the next game. Like the opener, like you've almost got an off season before you're going to play football. Does it really? Can you really hearken back to more than 3 weeks ago when you played a series as something that was beneficial? I don't know. It seems illogical to me.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think there's sort of two sets of rules. There's for the quarterback, and then there's everybody else, like per usual. And I'm with you. I'm saying, like, if you're not going to do one series, like, what's that doing? I forget last year, that touchdown run you just mentioned, I still don't know how he didn't get decapitated running up the middle.
They backed off. The Bengals backed off.
They were very lucky. Yeah, so lucky that the defenders decided, it's like they thought he was wearing a no contact jersey or something. So, no, I'm with you. I think that only because of the David Blau part, because he's so new to this, do you want him to be out there and be able to, go through the process for him? And look, if Daniels doesn't play, what are they looking at? A 7th-round rookie and Sam Hartman, a guy that's never thrown a pass in the NFL. So that's a tougher place to be for Blau. But, yeah, I'm with you. If one series, I just don't – what's that doing for anybody? And even if it's 2 – look, if it's, 2 series and you get a total of 15 plays, or, sure, that's plenty, relatively speaking. But, yeah, one series, just to everybody say he did it, I don't think really moves the needle. But again, for everybody else, I do think like there's whether you're talking about linemen or the defensive back, getting out there and doing the football things, getting hit, I think is important. You're right, 22 days out is still like, okay, well, you're going to remember this, but there is something to be said for that. It maybe helps shape your mind as you're going through regular practices. Oh, okay, I felt this, I need that, whatever.
Look, if it doesn't work out where you can have the mix of players that you want on the field against Detroit, there are no rules that say you can't play them against the Ravens in the final preseason game. That's still 16 days before the season opener. I do realize there is a joint practice 2 days prior to that, and that would be a determining factor. But if you wanted a true dress rehearsal environment, you know, there aren't rules prohibiting you from putting your starters out for 15 to plus plays in that preseason game against the Ravens, which is much closer to the regular season opener than the Detroit game. And you might have Allegretti available. You might have Oweh and some of the others defensively to put out there.
Well, and to your point with Allegretti on offense, right? If Jaden plays or doesn't play this week and then doesn't go against the Ravens, he will not have taken a live snap with Nick Allegretti, his new center, until week 1. I mean, again, I get practices and joints, but I mean, in terms of an actual game, that won't have happened. So that's not ideal, let alone just all the other aspects of it. Plus, even just for Allegretti, independent of Jaden Daniels, having him out there, if he's going to be the guy that's directing traffic, if the large part of why they value him is the football IQ, well, don't you need to get out there and do that? Like it is not just that role is not just for himself. It is for the entire line. So when is that happening? Again, this is why they practice. This is why they have a joint practice. But a game is a game. You can't completely simulate it otherwise. So, but yeah, I mean, I think to your point makes sense. The conservative nature of how teams run this, the way these guys have run it the last couple of years. That's where it's just hard to imagine that would happen. But yeah, I mean, I've always wondered this in a sport where tackling is such a big deal. It is like the basis of the sport, and you go all this time and not tackle. I know you're hitting the tackling dummy, and I know they've all been doing it, but it's still so weird to me that to get ready for a sport in which the main thing is getting hit, you don't get hit. So at some point, you got to get hit.
Yep. All right, let's just kind of talk big picture as to where we are at this point. Well, actually, one other question about tomorrow. If Jaden does play, who's the second quarterback in? If he doesn't play, who starts a quarterback?
Well, I'm going to guess Hartman would start only because that's kind of the order they went in the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got, independent of whether he's got the arm strength, which he doesn't, and does he have a real chance to make the roster, which I don't think he does. He at least he's more versed in the system, right? So in terms of just sort of, okay, let's at least execute the play and then we'll worry about the result. I think he's probably a better fit for that. But then I can see Kelly McManus being the guy that's playing most of the game, since he is more likely to make the roster, not to mention, just to have a potential future and all that. So, look, I think we talked about this the other day. I think this is a huge problem. I know people don't care. It's a minutia detail, but when you brought Sam Hartman in, it was like, what is the point of doing this when there's no chance he's making the team based on how they used him last year? And now they're in a situation where, because of the injury to Mariota, they don't have a viable quarterback out there to use if Jaden Daniels doesn't play, or even if he plays a series. I mean, then what? And at least Jeff Driscoll, Josh Johnson, those guys have been in the NFL. They've started games. They know how to do it. There is something to be said for that. I know people dismiss that, but it's a huge deal compared to what they have otherwise.
All right. Give me a player that's going to make the team that most people don't think is going to make the team right now.
Oh boy. Well, I mean, I guess like this is maybe not a much of a hot take. Johnny Newton got hurt, but I think Ricky Barber, was maybe had a better shot to make the team than people might have thought prior to the Newton injury. He only played 2 games last year as a UDFA, but he had a sack in that stretch, and I think he's had a pretty solid camp. I mean, I prior to the injury, I think Newton. I talked to Newton the other day before the injury, and he was telling me he had a really good camp. Cool, I'm not denying it, and they say nice things, but I hadn't noticed the impact a ton in camp and in the game. I think there was a lot of I don't know what it's just his best game, whereas Barber, I think, stood out a bit more. So I think that's a guy who, again, maybe it's not that shocking it with Newton out, but the guy that we don't talk about, and again, until Tim Settle gets back, it's a thin room. So if Barber can play, maybe even play some nose tackle, I think he could end up.
Can he play some nose tackle?
He did a little bit the other day. He's just not a big guy. So
no, he's not. But then again, Johnny Newton isn't either necessarily.
Well, and that's been, I think, the problem even before the injuries is just that, Newton hasn't shown an ability to play 3 downs. Again, Barber, just hasn't played enough for me to be able to say that. And let's be real. But when I'm at practice, I'm not often keeping eyes on him. But I do think there's been some good things there. And I think with Newton out, I think he's a guy that could, again, not only play, but in the rotation, or not only make the team, but in the rotation, actually, be involved more than you would think.
Is Quan Martin still your, gut on a player that might not be on the opening day roster that maybe some fans would be surprised by?
Hold back on that one a bit more because I think Will Harris is now looking more like the guy that I would question. The issue with Quan Martin was just like, okay, look, he's got way more upside and potential. He's a strong athlete than some of these other guys. It's just last year, between the benching, just listening to Dan Quinn talk about it hasn't been overly enthusiastic. It hasn't felt like, but actions speak louder than words. And whereas Quan Martin at least has been consistently running with the 2s, Will Harris was like, look, not everybody can play with the top 2 groups when you have a lot of safeties, but he's been playing a lot with the 3s. And even though he's been rotating up to the 2s to a degree, they're starting him in practices often with the 3s. He's older than Quan Martin. He's bigger than Quan Martin. He's got more experience than Quan Martin. So, there is value to him. But if you're only going to keep 5, I just think Percy Butler and Tyler Owens are making this team because of special teams, if nothing else. And that leaves one of these other 2 guys. And just based on usage, I think Harris is the one that I would look to now as more problematic to stay.
I heard for the first time as it related to the center position and the discussion about the Allegretti, second injury, maybe at least a tinge of concern in Quinn's voice. Did you hear the same thing? And what do you think they have as sort of a backup plan to Allegretti not being 100% or not getting enough reps for them to feel comfortable about the opener?
Yeah, I mean, so Allegretti had testing came back fine. So Quinn was saying it's not a setback, but obviously if you're having to go out of practice right after you came back, you can't be feeling too great about that. And that is one of those positions where, we talk about most indispensable players. Nick Allegretti made my top 10 because who is coming in? I mean, Julian Good-Jones has been out there pretty much with the 1s all summer. I don't know that that's making anybody feel particularly great. If you want him as a depth piece, okay, but to be like, hey, this guy is going to be our starter, I think that's a bit much. Matt Goulden, I think there's a decent chance to be the backup, having been the 6th-round pick. But again, are we talking about him playing out there? That seems like a bit much. You've got a couple other vet guys, Daniel Brunskill, who they brought in. He's been around the league a bunch. He's played a bunch of positions, including center. He's 32 or so. He would give you some experience, but again, that's not like a plan to say like, oh, he's the guy we're going with, in any real capacity. So I think this is a problem. And again, this is to me not a Monday morning quarterback issue. Not because of Biotis. That's fine. They moved on from him, so be it. But when you have Allegretti and he's the guy, to not have a higher end backup, somebody who could actually compete with him, which is what they were claiming, but there was nobody really there to compete with him. And then, just as I said, just as a get the equivalent of Allegretti, who last year was sort of that center guard hybrid, who is replacing Allegretti coming off the bench. And they didn't really do that as far as I'm concerned. And now they're in this pickle where, oh, wait, the one guy we have can't really play, or, he's been injured. He's been unavailable. Now what? And again, this could happen in week 3, week 8. Like, it's not like this is like linemen get hurt. So this is, to me, a somewhat problematic situation that I don't know how they resolve unless they get lucky that somebody gets waived or they can pick up a guy in some other capacity that they think, okay, he can start. We're good now.
Well, the good news is that the first game is against the Eagles, and Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis aren't that good. That is.
Also, by the way, this also connects with the fact that you've got Chris Paul on the other guard, and look, I think we all agree Chris Paul had a surprisingly good year, but he's playing between Laramie Tunsil and Tyler Biotish. That's different than all of a sudden Brandon Coleman's on one side and it got uncertainty at center. What does this do for Chris Paul? I don't think he has looked as sharp in practice necessarily as you would maybe like. So I think now all of a sudden you're making that spot a little bit worse. That's mostly the Tunsil part, but not having the experience next to him, that is a tough place to be. So, yeah, I mean, they could be hurting at two positions to some degree if Allegretti's not in there.
So tell me real quickly about Brandon Coleman so far. Is there a confidence level in him that they're going to be okay there? I mean, it's not Tunsil, but it seems to me you're out there every day, but that as of now, there's not a lot of alarm about it. They feel pretty good about Coleman at left tackle.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's done a pretty solid job. When I've seen some of the jailbreaks happen in practice, it feels like they're more coming up the middle or from the other side of the line than over Coleman. And, I think that was the thing. It's like, oh, the huge blow is losing Tunsil because there's no replacing that level of talent. But independent of that, Coleman showed some good things last year when he replaced Tunsil at the end of the year. He's got the crazy athleticism. It's just more of a matter of can he be available and, be a bit of a, add a little bit of a mean streak kind of deal. I think he's done a good job of these things. So, despite the consternation about losing Tunsil, which is a huge deal, Coleman is not one of the parts I'm more worried about. It's what's inside to his right is where I'm getting more concerned. So, I think he looks pretty reasonable, all things considered.
How far right? Like Connerly Jr. far right? How's he looked?
It's been a little, Bambi on ice a little bit still. Like, it's not always smooth. And he talked about this the other day. We had him in the press room. He was saying, he hasn't played up to his standards. And I was like, well, what isn't up to your standards? And he went through a litany of things, including like his working with his hands. And that was something that got brought up later on. I want to say by Quinn, like the next day, that's something he's got to work on. But, I think it's a general work in progress. It would be less concerning if you had Tunsil and the stability at center. But since you don't, it's like, okay, can this kid be a guy you run behind, lean on? And I don't know that we're there with him. Yeah, but mostly my concern is, like I said, the left guard and the center combination. Just what does it look like? If it's Allegretti and Chris Paul, okay, you can breathe a little easier. If it's Chris Paul and then somebody else, I think it's that's where I would be like, ooh, I don't know if I'm feeling pretty good about this right now.
All right. Our training camp coverage here on the Team 980 is presented by Xfinity. Score the most reliable Wi-Fi, one price, 5 years, guaranteed. Xfinity, imagine that. Ben covers the Wizards as part of his Substack as well. And the Wizards made a trade earlier this week. They got Trey Mann for Cam Whitmore. There was a second rounder that was involved in the trade as well that the Wizards got back. So I like Trey Mann. I think Trey Mann can shoot it. It adds another, potential off the bench scorer for them. By the way, Julian Reese was involved in the deal too. The former Terp is headed to the Nuggets as part of that trade. But anyway, give me your overall thoughts on this trade.
Well, I think like it sort of to tie it in with what we've been just talking about here with the Commanders. Like the Commanders seem to have some depth at receiver. We've talked about who somebody may be getting cut that would otherwise make the team. That guy is essentially Cam Whitmore. Like they have just so much depth on the wing that a guy who's got he was a first round pick. There's some potential for sure. I think he's had maybe some questionable attitude problems in his career, and it just hasn't quite clicked yet.
Right.
Under normal circumstances, you say, "Hey, keep rolling that dice," but they've got a lot of other guys, so I think they turned a depth piece into something that they felt they needed, and that is another point guard option behind Trae Young and somebody with a bit more experience. I mean, Trey Mann is 26. That's not a grizzled vet, but compared to 19-year-olds, which the roster has a bunch of, he is kind of old man River. So I think it gives them, like I said, another option behind Trae Young, gives some competition for Bub Carrington, who they may not view as just a natural point guard. And then, like I said, another guy in the room who can buy beer. I think all these things are reasonable. And for a guy in Cam Whitmore who, again, was this never going to play? They pick up an extra second-round pick to boot. So, to me, it's a pretty easy deal to make, a relative no-brainer.
All right. Talk to you on Monday. We'll see what happens tomorrow. Looking forward to it. Glad it's a 12 noon game. It'll be over quickly, not late into the night. Not that I have a problem staying up. That's not a complaint of mine. All right. Thanks. Talk to you later.
See ya.
Ben Standig, everybody, at Ben Standig on X. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com. Did you guys know that this IndyCar race is in town this weekend? The Freedom 250 Grand Prix.
You're driving around, it's hard to avoid it.
I have not driven downtown this week to where the race is being held. And I'm sure that it's my fault for just realizing this. I realized it yesterday. I knew that this was happening. I didn't know it was this weekend until yesterday. But part of that is probably, all due respect, not the best of jobs, maybe, of letting everybody in town that might be able to talk about it or have somebody on the show to talk about it or whatever. But whatever. I won't. I did look at the layout of the track. It starts essentially at Pennsylvania and 3rd, right in front of the Capitol. And it heads down Pennsylvania to 9th Street. And then you make a left on 9th. Then you make another left onto Constitution, a quick right on 7th. So you're actually cutting through. At that point, it would be, you're in front of. You got down to as far as what I used to call the Dinosaur Museum with the kids, the Museum of Natural History, the Museum of American History. But now you're coming back to Independence, making a left, and then you're right in front of the Air and Space. You're right in front of the Air and Space, heading towards the Capitol again, where you then make another left onto 3rd Street, and then you're back to the beginning. Pretty cool. I'm not going to go down and see it, although
it's going to be
the game will be on. What time does it start?
No. This race is Sunday.
Oh, the race is Sunday.
Yeah.
I'm playing golf Sunday.
Well,
what time does the race Sunday start?
Noon, I think. Let me check the site.
I actually, it's on my list of things that I've never really done. I've never gone to a NASCAR race. I've never gone to an IndyCar race. I've never gone to an F1 race. And I've been told that like the Daytona 500 is as good a party as you can go to. The Indy 500 is not like on my bucket list of events, but I've talked to friends of mine that have been and they loved it. This isn't that, it is IndyCar, but
race is Sunday at 1.
Sunday at 1. I would imagine, you got to get some sort of elevated position. Maybe that first straightaway is a good spot down Pennsylvania.
Yeah, a lot of it's.
I would imagine that the seats and the tickets and stuff are sold out. I don't know.
Sold out or quite expensive.
Are they quite expensive?
From what I've heard, I haven't really done because Lord knows I can't afford it. So why would I?
I'm gonna look this up to see what the prices are on like StubHub to see what they have for this. I don't see anything.
There are a bunch of different ticket areas and as well as some free fan zones that you can go to.
Right. Okay. We'll see if we can find it. Welcome to town, Indy cars, for this Freedom 250 race.
They're rolling them around on Metro.
What'd you say?
They're rolling the cars around on the Metro. They like strapped them to a train and just started like parading it through the tunnels.
All right.
It's cool.
ESPN just put something out that I want to talk about. Literally within the last few hours, Mike Clay of ESPN.com essentially went through the 1 through 32 rankings of every position group in the NFL. So this isn't ranking players like top 10 at each position group. This is ranking the teams 1 through 32 per position group. So as an example, the quarterback position ranked 1 through 32. Buffalo is ranked number 1. The Rams 2, KC 3, Baltimore 5, Baltimore 4, Cincinnati 5. I mean, the starting quarterbacks are great, but they're also taking into consideration, I guess, the backup. Washington on this list is 8, the 8th best quarterback room in the NFL. Number 8 overall. Remember, Jaden was tied for 10th in the position-by-position top 10 per players. 8th as a quarterback room, as a position group in the NFL. That is their best ranking of any position on the team. Their running backs are ranked 31st in the league out of 32 teams. The best, by the way, if you're wondering, Indianapolis is, is it, would you have, man, is that the best running back room with Jonathan Taylor? And I guess they're keeping the quarterback as part of the running back attack. Who would you like? I would think of Atlanta or Detroit, but I guess with Tyler Algier gone, who did Atlanta sign as a backup quarterback? A backup running back to Bijan.
I'll give you 3 guesses. Same initial.
Brian Robinson Jr.
There it is.
We knew that.
Yeah, we discussed.
We did this a few weeks ago. But Washington's running back room ranked 31st out of 32 teams. How about their wide receiver room? 22nd in the league. Pretty easy to pick out the leaders in this. Cincinnati. Wait, as a wide receiver group, didn't we have? It wasn't Mark and Largo. Somebody tried to make the case. Ivan tried to make the case that adding Diggs would make their overall pass receiving group, which includes tight ends, top 5 in the league, right? They're 22nd for their receiver room right now. Cincinnati's 1, that's obvious. The Rams are 2, that's obvious. Minnesota 3, pretty obvious. Dallas 4, Detroit 5. I told you that Dallas wouldn't necessarily be my number 2 or number 3. They have it at number 4. I would definitely go Cincinnati Rams in that order in terms of the receivers. Washington 22nd in the league after the addition of Diggs. Tight end room. The tight end room 28th out of 32 teams.
Disrespectful.
The Raiders are number 1 with Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer. They've got 2 really good tight ends. They don't have any good receivers. Watched a little bit of that Raiders game with Mendoza getting all the snaps. Very mixed. I mean, he threw a bad pick that got returned for a touchdown. He also, you can tell with the size and sort of the poise. I've seen some of these interviews with Fernando Mendoza. They did the podcast with, what's his face, who played here briefly, played for the Titans, the linebacker, along with the offensive lineman from Tennessee. You know the podcast?
Will Compton, yeah, Bussin' with the Boys.
Bussin' with the Boys. They did that podcast, all of the quarterbacks for the Raiders, Mendoza, Kirk, Aiden O'Connell, and I forget who the other guy is. It was hysterical because Mendoza's trying to tell stories and he's getting them all wrong, and Kirk's trying to tell the story for him because he's told the story to Kirk, and Kirk understands that he's leaving out key pieces because Mendoza tells the story about how late one night during the recruiting process, he just called Kirby Smart at like midnight because he was going to tell Kirby Smart he was coming to Georgia. But Kirby Smart didn't answer the phone. And he woke up the next day and his mother said, no, you're going to Indiana. Pretty funny. Offensive line-wise, Washington at 31st in the league. So 31st running back room, 31st offensive line room. Obviously, that factors in the Tunsil injury. The number 1 O-line room, Denver, followed by Philly. And then we get to the defense. I'll go through that when we come back. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980. All right, the ESPN list position by position group, ranking the teams and their rooms 1 through 32. I went through the offense. The quarterback room was ranked 8th in the league. That is by far and away the strongest room position group wise for Washington, as ranked against the rest of the league. Wide receivers came in at 22nd, tight ends at 28th, O-line at 31st, and running back at 31st. Interior defensive line is the first of the defensive categories. Washington's group ranked 21st, so better than some of their offensive rankings. 21st overall with the likes of Kinlaw, Settle, Payne, etc. What about their new group of edge rushers? 29th. Nobody seems to be that impressed with Owe or Chason or Armstrong. What about their off-ball linebackers? Actually 19th. So Luvu, Chenal, Styles getting some love there. Still not top half of the league. Corners, not their best either at 22nd. And then safeties at 28th. And that creates an overall ranking of NFL teams per Mike Clay's, laying out position group by position group. The Rams are the best team in the league, followed by Baltimore, Philly, New England, and Seattle. Washington comes in at 24. Not as low as some of the power rankings we've seen. It seems about right. Somewhere between 19 and 23 before the season starts. They'll play the season regardless. That's what they do in the NFL. So there you go. No one's expecting much from Washington this year. I mean, legitimately one of the teams that nobody's expecting much from. Their over-under in Vegas continues to be, or anywhere else, continues to be at 7.5 wins. Yeah, I mean, this is not where we were last year in terms of league-wide expectations or even really our own expectations. But I actually feel pretty good about the upcoming season. The key is obviously what we've talked about a million times. Keep the quarterback healthy. All right, that will do it for today. Thanks to Ben. Thanks to all of you who called. If you're heading down to the Freedom 250, we might take some calls on it Monday because I want to hear what it sounds like and looks like. That's kind of a thing that is it supposed to be a nice day Sunday? I think it is. And it starts
nice
at
out
1.
today. I know that.
Nice day today. Rainy day tomorrow. Good day to stay in and watch some NFL preseason football or some golf, which is what I will be doing as much of. All right, Chris is next.